Okay.
Good morning, Chair House. It looks like you do have a quorum, so you can definitely get started.
Okay.
Thank
Is
you.
there any members absent?
I believe Jonathan Frankel just joined. Kendall, if we can please promote Jonathan Frankel. And I don't see Stuart Halpern. Other than that, I see everybody else.
Okay.
It looks like, yeah, so.
Okay. Well, let's get started. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our October 13th, 2021 Independent Taxpayers Oversight Committee, better known as ITOC. I appreciate everyone's time to join by web or by phone. And I want to also thank staff for putting this meeting together. There's lots going on with ITOC right now, and we're very excited for this new year and what we would like to accomplish. So it looks like we do have a quorum. So we will move on. And before we get started with the meeting, I would like to ask our interpreter, Carlos Diaz, to introduce himself and walk us through how you can access your interpretation services for today's meeting. Carlos, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair House. As was just stated, there will be simultaneous interpretation available. I will start with the instructions in Spanish, and I will be back with the instructions in English before turning it back over. Buenos días, bienvenidos, bienvenidas a esta sesión del Comité Independiente de Vigilancia por Contribuyentes, mejor conocido como ITOC. Se está ofreciendo servicio de interpretación simultánea. Para hacer uso del mismo, por favor, desplácese a su pantalla de Zoom donde aparecen sus controles en la barra de controles y haga clic en el icono de interpretación, parece un globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish o español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom en celular, tableta, etc., presione primero los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Por último, si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio o silenciar audio original. Once again, there is interpretation available. In the event that there are any Spanish language comments, we invite all monolingual English speakers to please activate the feature. To do so, please scroll down to the bottom of the Zoom screen where your meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon. It looks like a little world, and then select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app on a cell phone, tablet, or other mobile device, first press the ellipsis, the three dots, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on Mute Original Audio to not hear the original Spanish low in the background. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Carlos. Very good. Now I will ask Ariana to go ahead and give us the rules about comments by the public as well as our committee members.
Thank you, Chair House. Good morning, everybody. So the members are going to be using their cameras. We will take live public comments, and members are asked to turn on their cameras when they have a comment or question, and the Chair House will recognize you. As noted on the cover page of today's meeting agenda, in addition to emailing comments, the public may also provide live comments during today's meeting. And in order to provide live comments, you can join today's Zoom meeting through the link or by dialing one of the numbers from your phone that are provided on the cover page of today's meeting agenda. You can join the meeting by clicking on the Join Webinar link provided in the confirmation email that you will receive upon registering. And when public comments are called for on an item on the Zoom platform, please click on the raise hand icon in the Zoom toolbar, which is on the top right of the screen. The chair will call on you by the name you provided, and if you are participating by telephone, please press *9. The chair will call on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number, and the instructions for providing live comments are also on the bottom of the cover of today's meeting agenda, which can be accessed from the homepage of SANDAG's website at www.sandag.org. All comments, whether emailed or live, will be made a part of today's meeting record. Thank you, Chair House.
Thank you, Ariana. Okay, let's get started with our first item on the agenda, which is public comments, and followed by any member comments. Are there any public comments, Clerk?
No, Chair, there are no public comments.
Very good. Are there any members of ITOC that would like to make any comments at this time? I don't see any hands raised. So with that, I would like to go and move on to our item number 2, which is Executive Director Report. Hassan, welcome. Thank you for being here with us. And you are on mute.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good to see you. Committee members, good morning. Thank you for giving me a few minutes of your time. A couple of things. So we're very excited. We're getting up toward the opening of Mid-Coast. You all got the invitation November 21st. I hope to see you there. It will be an amazing day for San Diego to open this project that took over a decade to do. I think we're still, as of now, on time, on budget. We do have, we're falling victim to the supply chain issues that we have in our nation. One of the railings for one of the stations, the materials got delayed, so we're looking at temporary solution not to delay the November 21st. But thank you very much for all the support you did over the years and all the money that we got from TransNet. This is an amazing project. Yesterday, and Alan Kaspkan, who's here today and can speak more to that. Yesterday was the groundbreaking for the I-5 carpool HOV lane between Palomar Road and State Route 78, and reminding you that this project, the HOV, the high occupancy vehicle lanes, will be converted to high occupancy toll lane, and we already started the work on that. Our chair, Blake Spear, the director of Caltran, Amashikan, Gustavo Allen, Mayor of Carlsbad, Mayor Hall, Assembly Member Tasha Borner, and many others attended the groundbreaking for the project. Just updating you on the 5 big moves. We're less than 2 months away from going to the board and asking them to adopt I call it the amazing vision for San Diego region, the reimagining of future transportation. And we're very much hoping that the board adopt it and we move it forward to the state and federal governments for approval, and hoping that the region commit to building the system as we move forward. Next week, next couple of weeks, an exciting I talked to you about before, we're putting a request for innovative concepts on the street. We want to look at private sector innovation when it comes to moving people in a clean, shared, and hopefully autonomous manner, underground system, 10 to 15 miles. We're also telling the sector, the private sector, that we don't want just you to spend your money, we want to be your partner. So San Diego will be in partnership with the private sector for whatever technology chosen for that effort. Just on the priorities, Otay Mesa 2 is still moving forward. The plan is still to open the facility by September 2024. Madam Chair, that concludes my report, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Director Akrata. Are there any comments by the members of the public? Clerk?
No, Chair House, there are no public comments.
Okay. Any comments by the members of ITOC? Raise your hands so I can see, or turn your camera on. Okay, very good. Congratulations to opening up I-5. That's great. The HOV lanes. Alan, I know you put a lot of work into this, and we've seen your report as well. So congratulations to both of you. Okay, we're moving on to the consent items. There are 4 items on the consent. Before I ask for approval of meeting minutes, we have North Coast Corridor status update, Transit Environmental Mitigation Program, and the 2021 Regional Transportation Improvement Program Amendment number 5. This was not in the original report, but then it is online now. So I hope that all the members and everyone has downloaded the correct or the most up-to-date agenda packet. So are there any of these items that from the members that are open for discussion or need to be discussed and pulled out of the consent agenda? Mr. Urso, I see your hand raised.
I don't necessarily need to have an item pulled out of the agenda, but I do want to highlight the North Coast Corridor. It's been a project, and Alan can probably remind me that it's been over 30 years in the making. And it is going to be a huge milestone when it's completed. It is also going to be a huge milestone of an example of working together collaboratively and turning something that at the beginning was probably what I would say almost an impossible dream. An impossible dream because there were a lot of community opposition to the project, that through the innovation of Caltrans, Alan, Sandag, and the teams involved with it, it ended up turning into something that became a reality because of all of the environmental innovations done with the project as far as the restoration of all of the lagoons and trying to avoid any disruption on the right of way. So I just want to make sure that it doesn't go unnoticed from us here at ITOC, and from me especially as a proud papa in a way of the accomplishment. So well done and thank you very much.
Well said. Alan, do you have any comments? I would like you to, since you are on consent, but if there's anything you would like to share, you deserve it.
Well, no, I just, quick comment. Appreciate all of the support that ITOC has given over the years, right? As Pedro says, the project's definitely been a challenge. I think it's a great project, but it definitely went through its challenges, and you guys were always behind us and appreciate that. Yesterday, just in a quick nutshell, yesterday we broke ground on the last 4 miles. That gets us to 78. And so those carpool lanes, and as Hassan said, we're working on converting them ultimately to express lanes. That last 4 miles will be complete by 2022. The good news is by the end of the year, we should have the carpool lanes from Solana Beach to Palomar Airport Road in Carlsbad open to the traveling public. So we'll be out of the corridor in total by 2023. We've got a number of community enhancements and active transportation improvements to finish and to wrap up, but we're making great headway. Most of the risks that we started with have been retired because we are out of the ground, but as Hassan said, we are dealing with some of the material acquisition problems that the whole nation is dealing with. So we'll keep you in the loop on that. But thank you guys.
Very good. Let's get back to item number 3. I would like to ask for a motion to approve the meeting minutes.
So move.
Second.
Okay, moved by Mr. Orso and seconded by Mr. Frankel. Clerk, would you please call for a vote?
CEO Private Sector Chair Sunny House,
Approved.
Finance Budgeting Vice Chair Stuart Halpern,
Halpern, yes.
Real Estate Right-of-Way Acquisition Jonathan Frankel,
Yes.
Biology Environmental Dustin Fuller.
I like Hoffman. Yes.
Excuse me. Licensed Engineer Les Hopper.
I think I have to abstain because I missed the meeting. Is that correct, Sunny?
That's fine.
Okay. Licensed Civil Traffic Engineer Michael Kinney,
Approve.
and Contractor Construction Pedro Orso Delgado.
Yes.
Okay.
And that motion passes.
Thank you very much. And we'll move on. Just want to thank Kim Smith and Richard Ratcliffe for your reports. Appreciate it. We'll move on to item number 7. And Ariana will share with us the actions by the the end of Board of Directors. Ariana?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Chair House. Your last meeting was September 8th, and since then, the Transportation Committee recommended the Environmental Mitigation Program Land Management Grant Program call for projects for the 10th cycle of funding. And then the Transportation Committee also recommended and the board approved the Regional Bikeway Program budget amendments that you discussed at your September meeting. And then as part of that discussion, Mayor Gloria directed staff to return to the board with recommendations on expediting delivery of the remaining bike EAP projects and how to improve timelines moving forward. So those are the updates I have for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to item number 8, which is the ITOC goal status update of appointment of subcommittee member. Julie, do you want to start us off?
Sure, thank you, Chair House. So good morning, ITOC members. At your last meeting in September 2021, ITOC Chair Sunny House introduced the FY22 ITOC goals, which are listed on attachment 1 of this report. The committee approved the FY22 ITOC goals and also established 2 subcommittees. Since the last ITOC meeting, both subcommittees have met at least once. Each subcommittee selected a chair and have revised their subcommittee names to better reflect the main work they will be addressing. Michael Kenny was selected as chair for the subcommittee on regional safety, previously known as goal number 2. And Jonathan Frankel was selected as chair for the subcommittee to consider TransNet ordinance amendments, also known as goals number 3 and 4. In addition, the subcommittee to consider TransNet ordinance drafted a scope of work to solicit independent counsel to advise the ITOC on potential ordinance amendments that may be needed to both align with the 2021 regional plan as required by the ordinance and based on performance audit recommendations. The legal counsel's scope of work and solicitation will be addressed in item number 10 of this same agenda. Following the September ITOC meeting, Les Hopper expressed interest in volunteering on the subcommittee on regional safety. Today, the ITOC is asked to appoint ITOC member Les Hopper to serve on its FY 2022 subcommittee on regional safety. So with that, are there any questions?
Thank you, Julie. If there are no questions, are there any questions by the public, first of all?
No, Chair House, there are no public comments.
Members, if you have, are there any questions by the members of the committee? If not, I would like to entertain a motion to appoint Les Hopper to the subcommittee for goal number 2. Do I have a motion? Michael Kenny.
I'd like to make a motion to appoint Les Hopper to the Safety Committee.
Very good. Do I have a second? Oh, okay, Stuart, I see you. You're on mute.
I'll second.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, clerk, would you please call for a vote?
CEO Private Sector Chair Sunny House.
Approved.
Finance Budgeting Vice Chair Stuart Halpern.
Halpern approved.
Real Estate Right-of-Way Jonathan Frankel.
Yes.
Biology Environmental Dustin Fuller.
Yes.
Licensed Engineer Les Hopper.
Yes.
Licensed Civil Traffic Engineer Michael Kenny.
Approved.
And Contractor Construction Pedro Orso Delgado.
We will welcome Les. Yes.
And that motion passes.
Thank you, clerk. Thank you, everyone. Welcome, Les, to the subcommittee for goal number 2, which is regarding safety. Appreciate you stepping up, and I'm really excited to get the members engaged in hopefully moving along these goals that we have established. I know it's not on the agenda necessarily, but Mr. Kenny, do you have any comments you would like to make for your subcommittee as far as any updates? We have the report. Anything else you want to share?
The discussion, well, yes, the discussion at the subcommittee meeting revolved around staff reaching out to member agencies and getting a hold of their Vision Zero or roadway safety plan that the agencies are preparing for their HSIP grants and getting those to us. And there's a discussion among staff on how to best support us in terms of human resources. And both of those issues are going to get reported back to us on our next meeting, which I believe is in January or February.
Very good. Thank you so much. Okay, we are moving on to item number 9. Julie, would you like to start us off? And I'll take it beyond that.
Sure. So this past spring, the ITOC conducted its FY 2021 triennial performance audit, which was completed in spring. And many of the recommendations the audit discussed concerned the programs overseen by the ITOC. But the triennial performance also reviewed the ITOC program itself. The audit resulted in 4 recommendations specific to the ITOC, and they were number 1, more clarity on the conflict of interest policy, suggesting to include the conflict of interest policy along with the application materials when soliciting new members. Number 2, modify the ITOC member service limits, making them consistent across the board, whether the member is serving a full term or a midterm vacancy. Currently, members appointed to full 4-year terms are allowed to serve a maximum of 8 years, while members serving a midterm vacancy can serve up to 10 years. Recommendation number 3, is a suggestion to expand memberships to include additional subject matter experts. For example, consider including experts in emerging fields that we regularly discuss at our meetings. Our sister agencies have subject matter experts in a variety of fields, such as transportation technology, smart growth, and climate change. And lastly, consider moving the selection of ITOC members to a body other than the board of directors to enhance transparency. To assist the ITOC in addressing these recommendations, staff conducted research on peer agencies, and which can be found on attachment 3 of this report, and which is to help guide this morning's discussion. So with that, are there any questions or comments?
Thank you, Julie. Are there any members of the public that have any comments on this?
No, Chair House, there are no public comments.
Okay, before we get feedback from the members of the committee, I do want to mention what we would like to do with this item. This is an item of discussion to get feedback from the committee, members of the committee, to make sure that the subcommittee continues its work to try to formulate language that's needed to be included in the amendment for TransNet, if we're going to make any changes to ITOC and follow these recommendations. So what I'd like to do today is go through items 23 through 26 one by one. The subcommittee has had some discussions and has some thoughts and ideas, and I welcome the subcommittee members to chime in and talk about that. But let's start with number 23. As far as conflict of interest policy, from my personal experience, it's always been, I've always had a dilemma as a consultant working in the industry when I worked for large companies, that I would be conflicted on joining ITOC because of the way the language is written. And it wasn't clear to me until one of the members of the ITOC actually spoke to me and said, no, this is not really a conflict, even though you're working for a large company that's working with SAND Act. There are rules and there are ways of eliminating conflict. So that's something that I thought is important to be clarified if we want to engage active members of the industry who have, working knowledge of what's going on in the industry. And we can that way expand the pool of candidates to make sure that we get good members are willing to serve, even though they're actively working in the industry. So that's kind of the premise behind it. And we wanted to see if there is a way, there is a memo that's listed here that was drafted in 2010. And we thought this time maybe we can get SANDAC to update that memo, provide a little bit more clarification about the recusal opportunity so that we can avoid conflicts. So that's something that we are recommending SANDAC to do. So first, number 23, I would like to hear from other members. Pedro, I see your camera on. Would you like to comment on that?
No, not at all. Thank you.
Right. Are there any other comments from the members about item number 23 and what we can do to further clarify the conflict of interest policy? I don't see any hands. Okay, so the resolution or the recommendation is for us to have SANDAC update the policy. And the other thing is to make sure that the conflict of interest, the updated conflict of interest policy and clarifications are included in the advertisement process, so people are aware and understand what constitutes the conflict. So, okay, number 2, modified transit extension ordinance language to be consistent with the service limits of all members. In this case, the situation is that members are supposed to serve 2 full terms of 4 years for a total of 8. However, if you join or fill a vacancy for someone else midterm, then that you could have up to 10 years to join. So the idea behind this topic is to create some consistency so that we don't have some members that are joining are serving for 10 years and some are for 8. Make sure we have some consistency in all of them. The recommendations of the audit was to change the term to 10 years. The subcommittee members discussed this, and we thought, that's the 10 years still has to be split up between 2 full terms and maybe a half term, or we do know that there's got to be terms have to be staggered, so we have no more than 2 members being replaced at the same time to make sure we have continuity on the committee. So with all of that in mind, we thought, well, why we don't necessarily have to go to 10 years. Why not recommend something a little bit different? Why not recommend that if a vacancy happens within midterm, the new member that would be selected for that term will just serve a full term of 4 years. So basically that position resets the new members coming on board at 4 years. And if we do that, then we can have 2 full 4-year terms, considering the staggering way we can have, we can still maintain the 8 years or the 2 full terms as our proposal. Subcommittee members, Mr. Frankel, Mr. Halpern, would you like to add anything to this? Did I explain it correctly? And yes, go ahead, Stuart.
Thanks. I thought that was a great explanation, but I apologize. I actually just wanted to go back to the last one just for 1 second. I had a process question. I'm not 100% sure what's supposed to happen there. We're not talking about any prospective change to the ordinance or board policy. I just want to be clear, you're just recommending that staff really amend recruiting and descriptive materials surrounding the existing SANDAG conflict of interest policy to which we're subject. Is that?
Thanks for the clarification. Yes, I misspoke. We don't need an amendment for that particular item. That's more just a clarification. Thank you, Stuart.
Great. Okay. And I would just support your comments relating to the terms. I think if we could, as we discussed the subcommittee, I think we could simplify things as opposed to this, filling of a vacancy and with the remaining 1 or 2 years term thing. Just anytime there's a vacancy, really just go to a normal recruitment for a full term. And then we just do that 2 by 4 year term scenario. Makes sense to me. So I'd be supportive of that.
Thank you. Are there any other members that have comments or questions about this item? I see Les, you have your camera on. Do you have any comments? Les? I don't. Okay, I don't see your hand up. And you may be frozen, I'm not sure. Mr. Franco, any comments from you on the subcommittee?
Thank you, Chair House. No, I think the description that you provided was very accurate, and I'm supportive of modification. And I, just for clarification, I know that Ariana put together a very helpful chart as to whether it's in the ordinance, the policy, or the bylaws, this change kind of lives, and how we would modify it. So if staff could clarify that for the record, that'd be great.
Yes, go ahead, Ariana, and then I'll get to Les. He has his hand up.
So maybe that can be part of the discussion going forward as well. I do see the language in the ordinance and in the policy as well as the bylaws. So in addition to the recruitment materials. So to the extent that we need to match those up, it may be worthwhile to do so. But again, maybe that's part of the discussion that the subcommittee can have, and we can get our legal counsel's opinion on that as well.
Very good. And Mr. Hopper, do you still have your hand up? I see his, okay, Stuart, I see your hand up.
Yeah, actually, just one more thing. I'm just curious for Ariana or anybody else. I know over the years, the staff has spent a lot of time thinking through this issue of terms, replacement, et cetera.
Yeah, can you hear me? I turned my video off.
Les, hang on. We'll come back to you as soon as Stuart is finished. Go ahead, Stuart.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if Ariana or anybody else on staff, you have a point of view based on your experience as to whether this simplified 2 by 4 concept has any unintended consequences or drawbacks that you can see from your experience.
Thank you for the question, Vice Chair Halpern. I think one thing we will want to just make sure that we are still consistent with, assuming that's the way to move forward, is the staggering of the term limits. So currently the ordinance calls for no more than two terms to expire at the same time to, again, as Chair House mentioned, preserve that continuity of knowledge. So that's probably something we will want to make sure we still are adhering to when the proposed change for the 2 4-year terms plus the 2 additional 2 years to equal the 10 is considered. That's one idea I can think of currently.
Very good. Mr. Hopper, do you still have a comment? I don't see you out here, but Les, do you have a comment?
How's that?
Yes.
Am I there?
We can hear you.
Sorry, I have trouble with Zoom sometimes, so I logged out and jumped back on under a different connection. But I really support the idea of the staggered terms. That's great. I'm on several other committees that do that, and so the continuity aspect is perfect. And my only question was, is that something that we would have to stagger terms starting next year, or is that already baked in based on when people have joined, the members have joined recently? Like, will we have to?
Ariana.
Yes, and actually, yes,
next year to make the staggered terms viable.
So Les, just so you know, your audio is coming out very slow. So I think there's an issue with your internet speed, but we did hear you. Go ahead.
Yes. Yes, and this also gets back to Vice Chair Halpern's question. I should have mentioned this also. So yes, we do have some members who are currently serving. So any changes that we make to either the, and as we go down this list on this item, right, the membership categories, but also the term limits, all of that will need to be taken into account so that we, are mindful of the fact that we do have current members serving and what the impacts to those terms might be.
So we will come back to the full committee for approval of all of this with more details and more information. The subcommittee has had one meeting on this particular topic. So all the details we will work out. And that's why we wanted to bring it up today, to get your feedback and comments. So appreciate everyone's input into this particular topic, but stay tuned for more. So any other questions or comments on that particular item or that particular topic? Stuart.
Yeah, just I'm wondering if for clarity, it would be helpful to actually do a vote to see that we have a genuine consensus that people like this 2x4 kind of core concept, or if you feel that we are getting sufficient feedback just by giving people the opportunity to voice objection. Either way, I just wanted to throw out to the group that I think, Sonny, what you're saying is that the subcommittee really wants to know what its marching orders are from the committee, right?
Correct. And I would appreciate, I don't think we're ready for a particular official vote, but I would like to hear from anyone on the committee who may have other ideas or may not be on board with the 2-term 4-year, as we mentioned, and the fact that we would eliminate a midterm appointment, basically. Please chime up, committee members. We would like to hear from you. Anyone else? Sounds like I hear silence. Okay, if I'm not hearing you with any other ideas and you're not speaking, I am assuming you're in support of what we are trying to do. But again, we will come back with more on that one. Michael Kenny, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I support what you're doing.
Thank you.
I'm not trying to be difficult by not saying anything. So yeah, as long as staff doesn't tell you you're breaking a rule, that sounds like a good thing to do.
Thank you, Mr. Kenny. Appreciate it. Okay, let's move on to the next item, and that is the actual membership, number of members, the type of members we have on the committee. As you know, since TransNet was voted in and the ordinance was written, there have been a lot of changes in the world, a lot of changes in the way we consider transportation. Technology, other things have been added on, priorities have changed. So the audit, the triennial audit, did some evaluation of membership and type of membership on ITOC. And we wanted to make sure that we have the right group of members for the, to basically evaluate and impact and sit on ITOC. Diversity in every aspect, in social and other ways, as well as the technical background and experience. So the audit and recommendations, which is in your packet, did say, for example, we could look at different categories that could be added on, make sure that we have disadvantaged communities, climate change, conservation planning, public health, environmental justice, social equity, trade, labor, local workforce diversity, transit, active transportation, multimodal planning. So based on that recommendation, we started thinking about what we have so far today. We have different professionals that are listed in the ordinance that would have to serve on the committee with finance and engineering, and some on real estate, land economics. We have people serving in that have done large scale construction. We have people that are that do design in the transportation field, and a CEO position, someone that has worked in large businesses as well as environmental science. Those are what we have today. So I like that my subcommittee members to also jump in and help talk about this particular discussion that we have had. Perhaps Chair Frankel, you may want to weigh in and help a little bit with this topic and what we discussed. Subcommittee Chair Frankel.
Thank you, Chair House. Yes, the subcommittee met to discuss two things. One is modifying the existing descriptions of our current categories to include things like multimodal transportation, smart growth, and other items that are consistent with the 5 big moves and the changes that have gone on over the years. Secondly, we discussed the addition of new categories, and specifically an expert in emerging transportation technology, and secondly, a transit user and a member of the public that could represent users of these systems that we are building. And so I think that the committee was supportive of both activities, the additional of 2 or more seats in those categories I just mentioned, and the updating of our current descriptions to match the current SANDAG activities and programs.
Mr. Orso, I see your hand up.
I have a question. Jonathan, from the point of view of the subcommittee, did you all consider, instead of adding positions, to maybe modifying the application when the member or new member is selected to include such items as you listed, but not necessarily expanding the number of committee members, but just adding as a sub criteria all of these elements that the audit recommended?
Yes, we did, Pedro. I think so. We discussed the potential to modify the descriptions, and that would be basically to kind of expand the scope of the existing category, or whether we wanted to move in a different direction and add a couple, 2 or more categories. So I think both options are on the table, and as a board, we can determine which direction we want to go in. And your feedback to us is helpful as we continue to work with staff. What your preference would be is helpful feedback for us.
My only concern at this point in time is that if we start expanding the ITOC membership, at what point in time do we say, okay, this is enough members, or does the committee start becoming too large to become effective also? So, I would probably err on the side of modifying the application process to add to the selection of the new members.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Orso. Mr. Halpern, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to add one other thought that goes perhaps to part of the question Pedro is raising. So for example, in the case of what we're characterizing as a system user, right, which is intended to ensure representation from people who don't only drive cars, and whether they be transit or bike or what have you. One could say that within the existing 7 categories, we add, if you will, some prioritization amongst candidates for a system user who also happens to be, the CEO or, et cetera, falling into their categories. The one difficulty I see with that, because it makes perfect sense, but just based on history, sometimes it's not a simple matter to find people who are qualified based on the existing descriptions in the first place in terms of domain expertise. And I think layering in other attributes may start narrowing the fields even further, which is why, at least in my mind, the concept of potentially adding, 1 or 2 seats would be a way to make sure that we can be successful in attracting those types of people if there's a consensus that those additional concepts are important for the committee. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Halpern. I do want to also point out that in your committee packet, staff has done a very good job of collecting data from other similar committees. And you could see that the number of committees vary, from, 6 or 8 to 16, so there are different sizes of committee. And I think we need to consider, and we need to make sure that everyone is on board as far as the number of members. But I agree with Stuart, sometimes adding on or having a transit user or a bike user as a member doesn't necessarily mean they have to have a technical background in engineering or something else. We want someone that's more focused on how they use the system. And this is a multimodal, transportation organization. So that was the thought behind maybe having a user added on, or someone with a technology background, because that by itself is so broad beyond just engineering or construction or something like that. So those were the ideas behind it. I do see Mr. Orso, go ahead. And,
I'll just throw something out there. If memory serves me correctly, the intent of ITOC was to oversee the expenditures of the TransNet dollars, not to oversee the plan or the putting together of the plan. And that's all I wanted to share.
Sure. So noted. I would like on this particular topic to hear from all members of the committee. So just to make sure we have had a full discussion, Mr. Fuller, go ahead.
Yeah, no, to your point, everybody should chime in. I guess during this process, do you envision a list of new potential seats and what their expertise or area of contribution could or would be? And would you also amend the existing seats to show, okay, environmental would include sustainability, sea level rise, greenhouse gas, something of that nature? I heard you mention environmental justice, and while it would fit under land use environment professional, I would have no area of expertise in environmental justice unless you're dealing with it from a CEQA or NEPA standpoint. So I would just be curious to see how you envision the categories breaking out and how many extra seats could potentially be added.
Mr. Frankel, would you like to respond to that?
Sure. So I think yes, as to both questions. I think the idea would be to present to the board at a subsequent meeting modifications to the existing categories as well as any potential new categories, and it could be 2 or more depending on our discussion today and the direction that we receive. So I think that would be our intent in continuing to work on this.
Okay.
That's good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fuller. Mr. Kenny, you have your hand up.
Yes, I do. I guess a question for staff, you can answer at the end of my comments, but if we added a few people, 2 or 3, what do you think the effect would be on our ability to get a quorum? Is it going to be easier or harder? I would think, it would be exactly the same, but from your perspective, if it's a larger crowd, does that become a challenge? And I think Pedro is getting at it as well. We're not an advocacy group. We have a specific task to to look at the finances of what's being proposed. And if we solicit for an advocate, that's almost unfair, because then they don't really have a platform to advocate for. They might get appointed to the triennial subcommittee, and that might be the only thing they get to do. So we should just be mindful of that they could be really hard positions to fill, because they're not going to be doing the core things that we're asking them to represent in terms of a background or talents. So in that regard, would you consider just adding one to see how it goes? And then if that's seamless and no effort, then maybe we could add one or two later, as opposed to adding 2 or 3 straight away. It's just something for the subcommittee to consider. But I'm generally supportive of looking for varied backgrounds and maybe even expanding the committee if that's the way to do it.
Thank you. Mariana, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, to the question regarding the quorum. I think that's the question on the table. Okay, so currently there's 7 ITOC members, and quorum is 4 members, 4 out of 7. If we were to add 2 more, that would be 9, and I believe the quorum in that case would be 5 out of 9. So that's 1 more member that would have to be in attendance in order to hold the meeting. I think about the board of directors, for example, or I think about other committees that also have a larger membership and their ability to be able to obtain a quorum. So I don't know that it would be more of a challenge necessarily. I think it's something we could work through.
I would imagine I would imagine anybody that wants to serve on the committee is going to be diligent enough to attend meetings, and there is a vetting process and a selection process to identify the right candidate. And you have a board that's much bigger than our committee that you get quorum on those as well. So Mr. Halper.
Did you say Halpern or Hopper?
Halpern.
Oh, thank you so much. One thing I'm curious, not to put you on the spot, Ariana, but do you happen to recall what Measure A proposed for ITOC membership? My recollection is that there was an expansion of the ITOC that was part of Measure A, and do you happen to remember the categories of expansion, just as a point of information?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't have it in front of me right now. I can't recall if there were more seats. I think there was perhaps a transit position, I want to say, if memory serves, but that's something we can follow up on or, provide to the subcommittee, absolutely, as something for them to consider.
And I do want to remind everyone why we're doing this. This is not about technical background. To me, it's about diversity of thought, diversity of perspective. When we say we want to have a transit user or a user, it doesn't have to be transit. It could be a bike user. It could be a highway, a member of the community. We are representing the taxpayers. We're not representing an engineering community necessarily. We have those backgrounds because that helps us make decisions on finance and other things that ITOC does, or receive information, provide input. But diversity of thought and background and experience is always important. So we're not looking for an advocate necessarily. We're looking for different modes of transportation that would have different perspectives, to have a member representing the community that would be sitting. So I just wanted to clarify that point. Stuart, you have your hand up.
Sorry, I didn't lower it from my prior comment.
All right. Mr. Hopper, we have not heard from you. I know you have some internet issues. Would you like to comment on this?
Sure. How's my audio?
Doing okay so far.
Okay, yeah, it was suggested that I just keep the video off for the link, so I'll try this. And yes, I like the concept in general, and I think there's some things to talk through or think through as to how we approach it. But one thought for the group to entertain is, would it be possible maybe to bring in this idea of more diversity on the board and in all aspects, and have them as like technical advisors rather than voting members of the committee? And that might solve some of the problems. And then the committee members can reach out to them as needed. And that's something that's fairly common as well in other practices. So I just wanted to see what everybody thought about that.
Any response to Mr. Hopper's suggestion? Mr. Halpern and Frankel, since you sit on the subcommittee, any thoughts?
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Hopper, for that suggestion. I do think that there would be an opportunity perhaps to have, working groups. SANDAG has many of them, and I've attended some of them in the past. And so if there were to be a working group, for example, on, multimodal infrastructure featuring, a number of cycling users and, pedestrian groups, et cetera, I think that certainly could be something we explore.
Very good. Mr. Halpern?
Thanks. Yeah, I think, keeping an open mind as to how to bring that diversity and expertise to the committee makes an awful lot of sense. I guess I would say maybe we could all be a little bit more thoughtful and look at the other examples of committees, just to get our heads a little bit more around this issue of the number of committee members, and is going to 9 going to be too many? One of the other things that we also talked about is, if you think about the 5 big moves and the priorities of the agency going forward, are there some of the existing categories that could be consolidated? Could you consolidate the CEO and the finance professional? Could you consolidate the architect and the engineer? If people are really concerned that, going from 7 to 9 is too many, but if there's consensus that we'd like to kind of broaden the perspective, there might be other ways to do it. So I guess maybe one thing I would sort of throw back to the group is whether there is general consensus that the aspiration for greater diversity, as Sunny's characterized well, is something that we want to try to achieve. And then it becomes a secondary question of, okay, what are some of the alternatives, how we get there?
Thank you. I know, Mr. Kirk, you have your hands up, so I'll go to you first before I go to Mr. Orso, just to make sure you're responding maybe to any of these discussions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to flag something. I'm not weighing in at all about the substance of how you think the committee should be comprised. But an issue that's becoming apparent is, as you know, under the ordinance, there are certain means for amendments of the ordinance, but among those are certain lockboxed portions of the ordinance. And among those is paragraph 11. Paragraph 11 relates to ITOC, and paragraph 11 incorporates by reference the statement of understanding regarding implementation of the ITOC, which includes who is on the ITOC, what categories of membership there will be, and how those members are appointed. Paragraph 11 can only be modified by a vote of the people. This may be something that you're envisioning having your outside counsel take a look at, but I think a question that is a bit of a threshold question is whether these changes would be permissible, whether the board could approve these changes, or whether these changes would need to go to a vote of the people, given the amendment language and the fact that paragraph 11, including the statement of understanding that's incorporated by reference into that paragraph, are perhaps lockbox.
Very good point. Thank you for pointing that out. And that's exactly the reason we want to make sure anything we do here is legally binding and acceptable. So Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Kirk.
Of course.
Mr. Orso.
With Mr. Kirk's explanation, I will lower my hand.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Mr. Kirk, you still have your hand up? I believe that's just from previous. Any other comments, questions about this from the members of the committee? Now, as you know, we've only had one discussion, and I really appreciate everyone's input. The subcommittee will take all of your input into consideration, and we'll go back, and we are continuing to meet and to formulate. We want to, although also make sure that what we are suggesting is possible, amendable, legal. So all of that will be discussed, and we will come back to the committee for further discussion as well. So with that, let's move on to our next item on the agenda, which is legal counsel services, request for offer to review potential TransNet extension ordinance amendment. I know Ariana will lead us off, but I want to make sure that I mentioned that this is very preliminary as far as discussions that we have had regarding what we want to do with the amendment. There were some information that was shared in the packet that was has not been discussed within the subcommittee, so that will be done. But we're here to really talk about how we can get approval, and this is an action item, to get approval from the committee in going forward with hiring an independent legal counsel service. Go ahead.
Chairhouse. Are we skipping number 26?
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. I apologize. Let me go back. Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you.
Briefly, I will talk about that briefly because that's still work in progress. Number 26, thank you for pointing that out. I lost count of what we talked about. Number 26 of the recommendations by the audit was to explore options and feasibility of moving ITOC candidate screening and selection process outside of SANDAG board, and to maximize appointment transparency, minimize any perceived selection. The subcommittee again has been discussing that and talking about, is there a better way to make sure that we again select the people that know that are expert in what they're doing, have a commitment to the committee, and be able to kind of maybe take out any perception of political influence on the committee. And I know, again, Mr. Frankel and Mr. Halpern, maybe you would like to expand on this a little bit more, because I know that you've had some good comments regarding this particular topic.
Sure. I think, well, first, while we have Mr. Kirk on, I'm wondering if we could hear from him as to why he thinks we probably can't do any of this. But in any case, unless there's no bright line reasons that we can't, I think there are some conceptual reasons why, for sake of independence, the concept of, looking at alternatives to board selection, the current board selection process might make some sense. I think we've also had some recent experience that suggests that some change in the process might make sense just in practice as well. I mean, just for example, I think in your reappointment, Sunny, how many times did the board selection committee have to get postponed because board members weren't showing up for the scheduled selection committee? I think there's just some practicality. Board members are busy. This isn't necessarily a real priority for them. I don't mean to make pejorative suggestion when I say that. I think it's just objective reality. So I just think that there are some pretty good reasons why looking at changing the process makes an awful lot of sense. Again, subject to Mr. Kirk's telling us that we can't do it.
Mr. Kirk, are you still with us?
Chair House, this is Ariana. Mr. Kirk, I think, had to step out for another meeting, but he is anticipated to be coming back a little later, is my understanding.
Okay, that's fine. Are there any comments from the members of the, oh, I do see Ms. Blake. Do you have your camera on? Do you have a comment? Or?
I think that what this would go to what Mr. Kirk had said previously, that we would have to look at section 16 of the ordinance, which requires that amendments to other sections, including how ITOC is staffed and how those appointments are made, that would probably have to go to a vote of the people. And having the outside legal counsel, which I think is the next item on the agenda, this will be one more item that they can weigh in on to see if that would be required.
Okay, very good. Are there, so going back to this, the way ITOC members are selected, there is a screening committee basically that vets and reviews all the candidates right now, and then they usually recommend two candidates to the ITOC selection committee. And the selection committee is made up of board members, just for background. And these board members are pre-selected, I believe, once the fiscal year starts, so they know that they're serving on this subcommittee. The selection committee includes a large number of members from the county, the city of San Diego, as well as other representing cities that sit on the board. There's been experiences as far as cancellation, and this is not my first selection committee got canceled as well, and then got rescheduled. Was in the middle of COVID also, but then we've had experiences as such where it was not enough of a quorum to select the committee select the ITOC members, so it had to be rescheduled. And beyond that, the political process, and here we are supposed to be an independent body of representing taxpayers, but we are being selected by the board, which also basically manages the TransNet program and approval process as well. So those were some of the reasons I think the triennial auditors suggested a different selection process to be looked at. So we did look at some other type of experiences, maybe, maybe the ITOC members could be the ones selecting the new member, or at least some members of the ITOC committee to be involved in the selection process, if it is going to be a hybrid between the board members, but maybe ITOC members sit on that selection committee. Just again, it was just a beginning of a discussion, and looking for input from members of the committee to see if there's anyone who has any other suggestions. Again, there is in your packet, there is information about how other committees are being selected. Several of them do have the political board body or the appointees selecting those members as well. So any comments from the members of the committee? Anyone who can weigh in on this one? Has any thoughts? And I would like to again hear from everyone on the committee, because we're looking for your input before we can go back to the subcommittee and continue the discussions. So who wants to go first? Pedro, go first.
Oh my gosh. All I will say is that I am not sure that I agree that there's a conflict when the board is selecting the ITOC committee members. Maybe there is a perception, but there is also, like you stated previously, a technical committee that recommends which folks are moved forward. So if I were to make any changes, I would probably propose adding a little bit of membership to that technical committee that sends the representation to the board members. That's my only comment.
You're suggesting members of the ITOC committee?
No, no. So there is an independent group of, right now, I believe it's 2 people. In my case, it was the current director of SCAG and the director of Imperial Valley Transportation Commission that served as the technical committee to move forward the names of 2 applicants to the representatives of the board to make the selection. So my idea would be, maybe we need to add membership to that technical group that moves forward the resumes of the people that apply.
Got it. Okay, very good. Mr. Halpert.
Yeah, maybe just as further backdrop to the question you asked, Sunny, I wonder if the committee members could reflect on their own experiences from the selection process. And I would just ask if you felt, as part of the selection process, that the members, the board members in the room had clear understanding of what the ITOC was, if they seemed very engaged in the process. We've each had our own individual experiences, and I'm just wondering if people, in answering the question you posed, might just reflect on that experience to shed some light on at least this question based on their own experience. Thanks.
Well, Mr. Fuller, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So 2 things. One, I don't know that I have a very strong opinion either way on this. My experience was just fine. Met with, gosh, let's say 5 to 6 members, or was it 4 to 5? I remember Mayor of La Mesa, I think it was County Supervisor Ron Roberts, a couple other, I can't remember who else, but it was an easy experience. They were engaged. They understood what they were doing. They understood what my role would be. And they asked very good questions. Didn't feel that there was any bias, or at least I hope there wasn't any. But if it's the will of the rest of the committee to move this out of board purview, I'm perfectly fine with that.
Thank you for your feedback. Mr. Kenny, let's go to you next. Your experience with ITOC selection. You've been on the committee for a couple of terms now, so go ahead.
That's true. I got the impression that my background was maybe one of the more challenging ones to get volunteers for. So there's that. In when I stepped off of the committee, I felt guilty. I was going to the county and I was quitting in the middle of my term. So I went about trying to get other traffic engineers to apply, and I struggled, and I know most of them. So maybe my experience is a little bit different, and I don't think we should make it any more complex for staff to try and find applicants, at least for that reason, in the traffic engineers perspective. Have we asked the board if they're interested in continuing with this? Have we got any feedback? If they're struggling to get board members with the, to get up to speed on how to do this effectively, maybe we just ask them and they say, go ahead, do it yourself. That being said, I didn't have any particular problem with the process. Once I was in it, it seemed like it moved forward. I didn't get a whole lot of technical questions or even personal questions beyond general ones. I just assumed it was because I was a traffic engineer, and generally you get a lot of technical questions from people outside the traffic industry. So If you, honestly, Sonny, if you think there's a benefit to the committee to revisit these processes, I'm supportive, but I don't have a particular instance to add to your list.
Thank you. Thank you for your feedback. Mr. Orso and Franco will go in order. Your experiences are more current or recent because of your new appointment. Maybe Mr. Orso, you can talk a little bit about your experience.
So from my point of view, I did get bumped once for a lack of quorum. But once that got rescheduled and a quorum was achieved, the selection members again were engaged. The questions were fair. It wasn't necessarily technical questions. It was more about my ability and willingness to serve. So from that point of view, I think it was all fair. I think part of the other issue that might be a little bit broader necessarily than the selection itself is the way that SANDAG advertises for the openings of these positions. If you're not engaged or connected somehow with SANDAG, you probably won't know that these openings come about. So maybe that's an area that needs to be revisited as far as getting some sort of a broader broadcasting of the openings as they come up. But once in the pipeline, I think everything was fair and simple, and that's all I have.
Well, to respond to your suggestion, number 23 that we just went over was actually including that type of maybe broader advertisement, expanding the pool, making sure we reach out to more people. So that's something that will be also considered as part of this exercise. So
good, thank you.
Mr. Franco.
Thank you, Chair House. I didn't have any problems with the way that the selection committee handled the in-review. I was rescheduled once. I think that's come maybe more common amongst the more recent applicants. And I do generally think that there is value in our role as overseers of a voter-approved initiative, having the representatives of those voters be involved in the selection process subsequent to a technical screening. And so I would have no problem exploring whether the current chair of ITOC perhaps is on the selection committee, either alongside the board members or at the technical screening level. But I do think that the members that do advance to board consideration, are generally qualified from a technical standpoint and have been fully vetted. And at that point, as Mr. Orso mentioned, it is more about willingness to serve and interest in the position. And so I don't see a need to completely overhaul the board's involvement. And lastly, I think I would say that I think as a threshold matter, Mr. Kirk's comments are really important in that I think we do need an opinion prior to proceeding on the potential technical changes as to whether this is a permissible amendment at the board level, or whether this is a quote lockbox item that would require voter approval, in which case we may not determine that it's worthwhile in spending a lot of time moving forward with the item.
Good point. Thank you very much for that. And Mr. Hopper, finally, just make sure we have everyone's comments. Any thoughts on your?
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, Mr. Hopper, we're having some.
Just making sure you can hear me okay?
Now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh boy, that was delayed a bit, but okay. I would say that my process was very straightforward and fairly simple and similar to Pedro's, and that there were some outside technical committee.
We're having more technical issues, Les.
First, I agree with Pedro that if we were looking for more input from the outside, I do know those members. Okay, I'm going to try and reconnect.
Okay, all right, we'll move on. We need to move on anyway. We were actually right on time for the next item. I appreciate everyone's input. I think, again, this is a subject that will go back to the subcommittee for further discussion, pending the legality of what we're trying to do. We'll make sure we get outside counsel, I guess, recommendations on this as well. With that, let's move on to the next item. Now we can move on to item 10, which is legal services. I think, Ariana, you're presenting this one.
Yes, that's correct, Chair House. I can definitely help get this one underway. So this item is on the hiring the independent legal counsel for the ITOC. So the ITOC has previously discussed hiring legal counsel to assist as needed, including assistance with reviewing proposed amendments. And staff does anticipate bringing amendments forward in early 2022 for your consideration and the board's consideration to not only implement the regional plan, but also help address recommendations from the ITOC's performance audits. And your FY22 ITOC subcommittee to consider TransNet ordinance amendments was tasked with reviewing amendments, and they have drafted a scope of work for hiring independent legal counsel. That's attachment 1 to your report. Currently, in terms of budget, the ITOC has about $23,000 budgeted for this activity in fiscal year 22, and also has carryover revenue available for ITOC activities if needed. In your report, we've also outlined the anticipated schedule for bringing the independent legal counsel on board. And so the recommendation is up on the slide for you today. The ITOC is asked to approve the draft scope of work for legal consultant services related to potential TransNet extension ordinance amendments in substantially the same form as attached. And then number 2, authorize the subcommittee to consider TransNet ordinance amendments to work with staff to incorporate changes into the scope of work and or ITOC budget as necessary to execute the contract. Thank you.
Okay, this is an item for approval for a vote, but before we get there, are there any public comments?
No, Chair House, there are no public comments.
Okay, are there any comments or questions by the members of the committee? Any discussion? Mr. Kenny, go ahead.
A quick question. I was fooling with my computer and I might have missed it. Can you tell me how long it takes to hire counsel through our processes?
So typically the timeframe is a lot longer than what we've shown here in the report, but we understand that this is something that the ITOC would like to get done sooner rather than later. So we've worked with our contracts team to help put together this expedited schedule. And so that's on page 3 of your report here. So, you know, it is a quick turnaround still, so it is going to require all hands on deck and, you know, making sure that we adhere to all of these, you know, timeframes that are noted for each bullet. But I think it is doable. You know, it would be a request for offers. So, so that tends to be, you know, a mechanism for helping to expedite, as opposed to going through a full request for proposals, which takes much longer time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Orso.
I believe I read it in the draft, but it excludes any legal opinion on the regional transportation, proposed regional transportation plan. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, we did note that as a specific exclusion from the scope.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments by the members of the committee? If you could put the vote back up, or what we were voting on the screen again, it was taken off. So today what we're trying to do is, there are two items here. Make sure that the draft scope is approved, or, basically, and also authorize the subcommittee our subcommittee to consider transit ordinance amendment and work with staff to incorporate changes into the scope of work or ITOC budget as necessary to execute the contract with the legal counsel. If I could entertain a motion to move forward with this item.
So move.
Sure.
Okay, moved by Mr. Orso, seconded by Mr. Frankel.
Yes, thank you, Chair House.
Very good. Clerk, please call for a vote.
CEO Private Sector Chair Sunny House.
Approved.
Finance Budgeting Vice Chair Stuart Halpern.
Halpern, approved.
Real Estate Right-of-Way Acquisition Jonathan Frankel.
Yes.
Biology Environmental Dustin Fuller.
Approve.
Licensed Engineer Les Hopper. Okay, we'll come back. He may be trying to get back in. Licensed Civil Traffic Engineer Michael Kinney.
Approved.
And Contractor Construction Pedro Orso Delgado.
Yes.
Okay. Licensed Engineer Les Hopper. Okay, he is absent from this vote. However, the motion does pass.
Thank you very much, Clerk. Moving on to item 11, Mid-Coast Corridor update. I understand Mr. Ruelas is with us to provide us an update, but before we get there, are there any public comments, Clerk?
No, Chair, there are no public comments.
Okay, are there any members of the committee that may have any comments? If not, we'll get started and we'll ask for any input afterwards as well. Ramon, go ahead, please. Thank you for being here.
Sure. Can you guys see me and hear me okay?
We can see you and hear you.
Fantastic. Thanks. So good morning, Chair House, Vice Chair Halpern, and other ITOC members. My name is Ramon Ruelas, and I'm here today as Sandeg's Mid-Coast Corridor Director to provide you with a general update on the progress of the Mid-Coast extension of the UC San Diego Blue Line Trolley project. Next slide, please. So for those of you who may be less familiar with the project, let me provide you with a brief overview of what we're looking to have in place and operational in the very near future. This project adds an 11-mile extension to the existing trolley system. It's going to afford transit riders the opportunity to take a one-seat ride from the international border all the way up to the university community. We're adding 9 new stations, 5 of which will include parking. We've also funded the acquisition of 36 new trolley cars as part of this project. And speaking of funding, the total $2.17 billion budget for this project has come from a combination of TransNet and FTA dollars. Next slide, please. So this slide reflects the updated MTS trolley map that represents the entire trolley system, including the new Mid-Coast extension. It also shows estimated travel times between key destination points within the new extension and points south. When open, we estimate that students will be able to hop on the trolley from UCSD and reach downtown San Diego in approximately 31 minutes, and the international border at San Ysidro in approximately 70 minutes. Next slide, please. So we continue to advance the project on budget, and although it will be tight, we believe we will have it ready for revenue service by the planned date late next month. Our contractor has been busy working on finishing the station work, mostly at the 5 stations that are along the elevated section of track and the transit parking structure at the UTC Mall. Landscaping along this portion of the new alignment is ongoing, and most of the various systems work are also nearing completion. Next slide, please. So based upon where we were just this last month, we've pushed out the completion date by MCTC to next month. Although activities will continue beyond next month, we don't anticipate that those activities are going to impede our ability to commence revenue service later in November. Next slide, please. So this slide gives a graphical representation of where our project workforce comes from. As you can see, about 57% of the workforce comes directly from San Diego County. Next slide, please. So the project has also been a huge boost to the local economy. The project's contractor, Midcoast Transit Constructors, or MCTC, has employed over 5,000 workers on site, most again who are local to the San Diego region. Through August, MCTC has paid out over $200 million in wages to these workers. And even with the unprecedented challenges associated with the pandemic, the project continues to provide local work. Next slide, please. So our contractor has done a fantastic job with engaging the disadvantaged and small business communities. They are on track to exceed the disadvantaged business enterprise goal of 11.3% that was established for construction. And they're also on track to achieve and maybe even exceed the small business objectives as well. MCTC has awarded subcontracts to 109 different DBEs and has awarded approximately $156 million to these DBE firms. And when it comes to small businesses, MCTC has awarded subcontracts to 218 small businesses and issued approximately $209 million in payments to them. Next slide, please. So this slide just illustrates how we progressed on a quarterly basis since the start of the project with the use of DBEs against what was projected. And you can see that we're far exceeding the goal that we set for the project. Next slide, please. So when it comes to project risks, we continue to achieve success in managing them. We recently, as an example, we recently went through the process of mediating one of our more significant right-of-way risks on the project and at an amount that was slightly over what we had budgeted for it. So we look at that as a success and something that we can now put behind us, which is certainly fantastic news for us on the project. Next slide, please. So at present, the entire team continues to expend significant effort towards overcoming challenges we are facing to get the facilities ready for our planned scheduled revenue service date. There are 3 critical work elements that need to be finished for us to meet that date. Final elevator shaft alterations need to be completed. We need elevator inspections to be performed in a timely manner and to return with no significant findings so that the operating permits are issued for those elevators. We need city fire cooperation to issue our permits for the fire alarm systems and other fire life safety elements at the elevated stations. As Hassan mentioned earlier, we have been experiencing recent supply chain delays for some of the construction materials necessary for us to finish. The wire mesh fabric for fall protection needs to meet our scheduled delivery dates, and we need them to fit. The initial stair treads that we were placing on the project were found to be defective, so we had to switch to a new supplier. These stair treads need to meet our scheduled delivery dates. So we also have some non-critical work elements, such as the perforated sound panels at 2 stations and the access gates at the 2 UCSD stations, where we'll be able to move forward by installing temporary solutions to account for the material delays we're experiencing. Next slide, please. So over this last quarter, we've been able to achieve some key milestones on the project. In June, we turned over the southern 7.5 miles of the project over to MTS. In July, we topped out at the UTC Transit Center parking structure. In early September, we set the final traction power substation. We also set the final steel structural member on the project in early September. Next slide, please. So moving on to photos of these milestone events. On June 29th, Sandag Chair Blake Spear turned over the keys for the new guideway to MTS Chair Fletcher, representing the transition of the guideway control over to MTS. Next slide, please. July 22nd was a date that the project team celebrated the topping out of the UTC Transit Center parking structure. We were thrilled to have Vice Chair Mayor Sotelo Solis join us for that event and for taking the time to speak and recognize the efforts and contributions of all the workers who put time into achieving this important milestone. Next slide, please. The Fez Street Traction Power Substation was set on September 2nd. This was the last of the 14 traction power substations to be installed along the alignment. We anticipate having this station online and energized sometime this month. Next slide, please. And finally, on September 8th, we set the final piece of steel structure for the project at the UC San Diego Central Campus Trolley Station. In total, close to 2.5 million pounds of steel is being used on this project. Each of the 14 elevator towers along the project includes somewhere between 20 and 35,000 pounds of steel. Next slide, please. So besides the light rail extension, we've also implemented a number of other regional improvements along the corridor under this construction contract. Next slide, please. So this is the status of those projects that we were able to advance concurrently with the light rail extension. All but the Voight Drive improvements have been completed, and many of these projects were paid for with the help of TransNet dollars. Next slide, please. So here are the photographs of the two heavy rail projects. The ability to advance these projects alongside and concurrent with the light rail improvements was mutually beneficial and even necessary in some cases. These two heavy rail projects advanced critical efforts by SANDAG to double track the San Diego segment of the Los Angeles corridor. Their completions resulted in a continuous 14.6 mile stretch of double track passenger and freight railway between Miramar Road and the Santa Fe Depot in downtown San Diego, thus allowing people and goods to move more efficiently through the region. Next slide. So these photos coincide with 3 of the other projects. Next slide, please. And these photos showing the last 2 projects. The Voight Drive improvements are close to being complete, and the improvements at the Old Town Transit Center have been completed. Next slide, please. So our communications and public outreach team have been very busy trying to coordinate and plan the various events leading up to and including the grand opening event. Our communication strategy has been to celebrate the project and this new light rail extension. It's been to demonstrate SANDAG's capability for delivering major projects on time and within budget. It also emphasizes how this project provides improved access to employment centers, healthcare facilities, education, recreation areas, while also enhancing cross-border opportunities. And finally, to recognize the support of all our partner agencies, stakeholders, and most importantly, the public. Many of these events have required SANDAG to work collaboratively with both MTS and UC San Diego. Next slide, please. So as you can see from this slide, events have been ongoing since spring of this year. The team's efforts will culminate with the grand opening event that's scheduled for November 21st, as Hassan mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So the next few slides are going to showcase some of these events. So here are a couple of photos from the first Mid-Coast trolley ride that happened in late August. At that time, we were very fortunate to have United States Senator Alex Padilla join us on that day. Next slide, please. So here are a couple photos from our Community Appreciation Festival that also happened in late August. So as you can see from these photos, the public was given the opportunity to ride on the trolley for the first time on the new alignment between the Old Town Transit Station and the Balboa Transit Station. We were pleasantly surprised with the turnout for this event, which was much more than what we expected. Next slide, please. Finally, in early September, we were able to take members of the MTS and SANDAG board, along with others, on a ride for the entire length of the new alignment. Up until then, most had only been able to ride up to the new Balboa station. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, I'd like to ask that you please save the date for the grand opening event celebration on Sunday, November 21st. SANDAG, MTS, and UC San Diego have been working very close to plan an event that is befitting of this very special project. Us at SANDAG believe that the Mid-Coast extension will transform regional transit connectivity, connecting communities in meaningful ways. And we're looking forward to having guests from throughout the San Diego region celebrating with us on that day. The event will take place on the UC San Diego campus at Warren Field. We're planning on having attendees arrive by trolley using the new UC San Diego Central Campus trolley station. We think it's going to be a perfect way to showcase how the trolley extension will improve the lives of so many by creating faster, fair, and cleaner transit options for getting to academic institutions like UC San Diego. The event is going to be a family-friendly event and will include an array of festivities. We'll also feature many of our partners who made this project come to life. Save the dates will be going out soon, followed by formal invitations for dignitaries. Additionally, our project outreach team is in the process of finalizing a comprehensive advertising and outreach strategy to make sure the public is aware of this exciting event. Next slide, please. So Chair House, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you or other ITOC members may have at this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ruelas. It is so exciting to see this project to come to fruition and finally get completed. About 24 years ago, I was in the planning, on the planning team for Mission Valley East. And I remember there were obstacles for this project and some stakeholders were not on board with this one. And it just shows the success of Mission Valley East and how it helped through San Diego State, I think paved the way for this one. It also shows when an infrastructure project like this comes to town, not only it improves the quality of life for people, but it contributes to the economy, to the local jobs. It's wonderful. And being paid with TransNet dollars, this is a good example of why it's important to have these types of measures in place so we can build infrastructure like that. So congratulations to you and the entire team for delivering this project. Thank you so much. I would like to ask comments from the members of the committee. Any thoughts? Mr. Urso.
Ramon, congratulations to you and your entire team. Quite a milestone in Chair House. As you mentioned, one of the interesting tidbits of information stored in my old head is that UCSD did not wanted the trolley to go through the campus. It wasn't until after they saw what happened at San Diego State that they said, oh, we really want this as well over here. And that, you know, flipped this whole rhetoric around on it. Ramon, one quick question. Knowing, and maybe I'm mistaken, but knowing the elevators are, you know, one of the most critical elements, and knowing that if I believe it's the state architect, the one that certifies whether or not they're deemed operational, is there a recovery if you cannot get them certified, or maybe not?
So, you know, the elevators are a high risk item. That's why I highlighted them earlier today. You know, it's going to take a significant amount of effort from the state elevator inspector. They're not part of the Office of State Architect anymore, Pedro. They're actually part of the Department of Industrial Relations. So, but that notwithstanding, you know, we do need their cooperation and for them to show up when we call them out. They usually ask for a 5 to 8 day advance notice to come out and do that. And so they need to do that in a timely manner. We have had to make some adjustments and tweaks to the elevators, you know, within the towers. So that has been taking a little bit longer than we had originally anticipated. But without the state elevator inspector coming out and doing their review and inspections and signing off on them, right? We're hoping that he doesn't find anything that is so critical that would require us not to be able to open the elevators. So I think we have sufficient time to be able to get that work done. There is going to be one elevator that will not, 2 elevators that will not be in service. And we do have alternate plans for egress for getting to and from one level to another.
Excellent. Thank you, Ramon.
Very good. Any other comments from the members of the committee? Yes, Mr. Halpern.
Thanks. Also, congratulations to everybody. This is obviously a long time in coming and great stuff. I just had 3 questions and appreciate the presentation on a couple of the points that you made. One, I was curious, when you showed that slide that indicated travel times from various points, I'm curious if there are other transit alternatives, you know, buses, particular combinations of buses that compare to those point-to-point times that you gave, and if you happen to know what the comparative times would be. I'm assuming that this would be a major improvement in travel times, and that in some cases there actually are no transit alternatives. And it would be really interesting to have some, you know, understanding of what the comparison, if you will, to other alternatives for the public might be. And then maybe after you address that, I'll just quickly ask my other 2. Thanks.
So, I mean, it's a very interesting point. I mean, it is information that I certainly don't have in my back pocket at this moment. I certainly will look into it and respond back maybe at another meeting, or maybe we can go through Ariana to give you that information. So we'll look into that and get you that information. But I will say nonetheless, right, that it will obviously be a more efficient way of getting to point south from those areas than if you take the bus. I just don't have any data to support exactly what the difference is.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And also, this is not a real oversight question. I think, though, just as you described how meaningful this is going to be to the public, that giving that perspective of the comparison, might be helpful in helping everybody really appreciate how wonderful this is. Just two other related questions. One, that you showed that 57%, I think, of the workforce was local workforce. And I'm just curious in broad strokes how that might compare to a typical project. Not that this is a typical project, because obviously the size itself might have implications for, not even having within the local environment sufficient workforce to do all the work. But I'm just kind of curious if you could speak to that. And then very much related to that, you referenced that about, I think, 200 million in wages were paid to local workers. I'm wondering if there's any reasonable correspondence of that 200 million of wages paid locally, if that corresponds closely to the 57%, so that there is kind of a proportionality of the amount of workers to the amount of wages, if you understand what I'm saying.
I kind of sort of understand what you're asking for. So without looking at the statistics from other projects, it's really kind of hard for me to say that it's truly representative of other types of projects. I will say that when it comes to the labor pool, it's always a bit problematic, right? To get the sufficient resources you need in order for anybody really to go out and put out a major capital project such as this without having to go outside the county to get them. And in addition to that, it's not just the workers in and of themselves, but also maybe some of the specialty contractors that may not necessarily reside here in San Diego and have their headquarters maybe elsewhere. And they'll draw upon individuals that might live outside of San Diego County. And elevators is one example, but obviously the overhead catenary system is something that is extremely unique and specialized. And so, when it comes to resources, they frequently go where the work is. So, it's really kind of hard for me to really pinpoint and see that's actually representative. Now, when it comes to the $200 million in wages that have been paid, that's $200 million in wages that have been given to all employees. For San Diego workers, it's a little bit less than that. It's about $136 million. So I think it's 67% of the total wages that have been paid out to employees have been paid to San Diego workers. So although they only represent 57% of the workforce, they've gotten 67% of the pay, right? So that's a good story right there.
Right, yeah, exactly. And that's exactly why I asked the question, because I think that is a good story for people to know at a minimum that the proportion didn't go the other way is really heartwarming. So thanks again, appreciate it.
Sure enough.
Thank you. Any other members of the committee with any comments, questions? Okay, I see none. Thank you again, Mr. Morales, and congratulations. I would love to be there on the 21st and celebrate with you all. So I'll put it on my calendar. So thanks again.
Yes, we're looking forward to seeing all of you there. Thank you.
Okay, we're moving on to item number 12, which is the draft schedule of ITOC meetings, and Julie will kick us off on that one. Are there any comments, first of all, from the public, clerk?
No, Chair House, there are no public comments.
Okay, Julie, go ahead.
Thank you, Sunny, Chair House. So basically, we've presented this item at our earlier meeting last month for the first time. And this is just an update of a rolling calendar. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that on here, it says December, we will have no meeting. However, we have the chair has suggested that we go ahead and move forward with the meeting. So we'll be filling that in and updating that at our November meeting. But this basically is just some agenda items that we propose to bring to the committee and to put these back on your radar. on your radar, excuse me.
Thank you, Julie. The idea for December is we have so much going on, and with the amendment, the transit amendment schedule, we want to make sure that the subcommittees are meeting and discussing and moving forward with our suggested amendment to meet the deadline and make sure it's concurrent with the regional plan amendment for TransNet. So please make sure you have that on your calendar. The items, topics will be added on, will be updated by the next meeting. Are there any questions by the, oh yes, Mr. Orso, I see your hand up. Go ahead. Oh yeah, you're on mute.
Thank you for that. I have a question about the November 21st meeting. It shows the quarterly financial reports, the quarterly TransNet major corridors and bikeway program as being both consent and discussion. And I'm trying to figure out which one it is. The reason I asked this question is loaded in a way, because I would like all of the quarterly TransNet financial reports, the major corridor and regional bikeway programs, and anything that relates to financial monies being spent on major corridors and TransNet projects to be brought up for discussion and outside of the consent, because I feel that's our charter, and have a dialogue and not just, you know, okay, consent and we're done with it and having to pull it. If that's not the case, I believe that I will probably be asking to pull those items regularly.
Okay. Ariana or Julie, any response?
So the November agenda is a really packed agenda. So we had to move some items to consent. So that's the reason why they're on consent at this time. Normally, the reports, the quarterly financial reports that Andre brings, those are normally on reports. However, again, we just had such a heavy agenda that we had to move them onto the consent at this time. And then as far as the quarterly bike that you referenced, one of them is a quarterly report. However, the other one, which seems to be closely titled the same, is an annual report. So that's the difference. One would be on consent, and then the other one, the annual, would be as a report.
And Pedro, I think with the December meeting, staff is going to look at both agendas for November and December and rearrange this. So this will be changed based on what we're going to be able to discuss. I have seen the November agenda in advance before December got put back on, and we had quite a few items on there. But now that we are having a December meeting, things will be basically revised, and we will take your comment into consideration. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Mr. Halpern.
Thanks. You know, I fully support any member who wants anything pulled out of the consent agenda. One thing, maybe just for clarification, particularly with regard to staff, I'm curious if Pedro's suggestion is that staff do a sort of a full walkthrough of each of those items in each case, or if he just wants to make sure that we have opportunities with staff available to answer questions that the committee might have.
Pedro, would you like to clarify?
Yes, I would like to have a little bit broader level of discussion than just having them on consent. So, and not necessarily having a full-on report, but at least highlighting that, you know, we're having that discussion.
Okay. Okay. Again, staff will take that into consideration. Any other comments? Okay. If not, we will move on. We have future meetings schedule also presented by Julie. Julie, do you want to go ahead? That's item number 13.
All right, yeah, there we are. Having issues with getting off of mute. Upcoming meetings. So again, next month we will meet at on our regular Wednesday, which is November 10th, starting at 9:30. And then the following month, again, December, we will move forward with having that meeting. It's scheduled for December the 8th, again on a Wednesday, 9:30 a.m.
Very good. Any questions, comments on this one? If not, I want to thank you all again for participating, for your engagement and comments and presentations. I think this was a really good, productive meeting for ITOC members to get a kind of roll their sleeves up, your sleeves up, and get involved more in figuring out the future and what ITOC would look like. So we will continue to meet at the subcommittee level to continue to move our goals. I do want to make one more report because this was not on the agenda, but I did meet with, I had an opportunity to meet with CTAC and other members of that committee that meet together to invite them on behalf of ITOC to come to our meetings, provide feedback, and be more engaged. And that goes to goal number 1 of ITOC. I think that my invitation was well received. I think members were interested in engaging and participating. SANDAC staff will go through and provide invitations to them. I asked for their input, that when topics are on the agenda, to feel free to join us. So hopefully I'm looking for more direct communications with various recipients of TransNet funds as well, based on those discussions. With that, I am going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next month. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.